Judith and how she chooses to take down the general. She sets it up that she goes out every night to pray. On the fourth night, when she leaves, they think nothing of it. And the fourth night, she's leaving with Holofernes' head in the canopy. In Jewish culture, or historically, Jews had no problem celebrating her. In the same way, they had no problem celebrating Yael, who does something similar, right? She seduces a general into her tent, and when she gets him alone, she drives a tent peg through his forehead. In chapter 7 of Luke, it's very clear that this woman is a sex worker, and it's a very sensual moment, by the way. I don't ever hear anyone read it that way in church. Funny. It's a sensual moment, and she's got oil to pour all over his feet, and she's kissing his feet and washing with her tears, wiping it with her hair. But nobody names her. And so this woman isn't named. I mean, even just look at the names. Esther and Ishtar, those are the same names. Just different vowels. I like to think about Esther through this other lens, and that's she replaces Vashti, and Vashti is the queen to Ahasuerus, right? And she refuses to be trotted out in front of a bunch of men who've been drinking for days. She refuses to be, and because of that, she's let go, because good gosh, what if that got out, that this woman stood up to her man and said no? When you think about biblically, the Hebrew Bible, the people of Israel are often referred to as a woman, but often in a subordinate role to Yahweh, their husband. And they're getting their bleeps whooped by God because they're step out on God. And how nice to have a female representing the people, and in a strong way, right? I mean, I just think that's kind of lovely.
Today my guest is Jennifer Grace Byrd, Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary, and Ph.D. in New Testament Early Christianity from Vanderbilt University. We have 3 books that I want to present to you. One is The Resurrection of Mary Magdalene, Legends, Apocrypha, and the Christian Testament by Jane Schaberg. Mary Magdalene Understood, also by Jane Schaberg, Melanie Johnson Debaufre. Mary Magdalene and Many Others, Women Who Followed Jesus, Carla, Ricci. These are choices from Jennifer Byrd herself regarding the topic today of heroines in the biblical text. Mostly going to focus on Judith, Esther, and Mary Magdalene, but also jump to other women as well. I hope you enjoyed this. Also, make sure you check out jennifergracebyrd.com and check out her books as well. Permission Granted is my favorite. That's the one I would recommend right away. But there's also many others, so do some shopping, take a look through the website, see what you like, maybe give someone else a gift as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Professor Byrd's YouTube channel. It is a priceless resource for information on these topics. As you can see, I'm already subscribed. I already have that bell hit. So I recommend you should do the same. It's free education from a high-level professor. You can't beat it. And welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And I'm with Jennifer Byrd again for the second time. The last one we did was awesome. If you haven't saw it yet, go check it out. We were going over your book, which is an amazing book, by the way. I recommend it. You just saw me talk about it in the intro before this, so check that out. The link's in the description. Today we're going to talk about the women of the Bible, because you always hear about it's the God of Abraham, it's the God of Jacob, it's also the God of Esther, who is a hero, and so is Judith and Mary Magdalene. So I figure we can focus on those 3. And we were talking about Judith before we started recording. It's a fascinating story. I don't even think this story is in the Protestant Bibles.
Correct. Yeah. It is not. It is considered canonical for Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics. Yeah. And it's apocryphal for Protestants. Yeah. And Jews don't consider it canonical at all, but they do revere her and like her. So
yeah, right. Because this story is phenomenal. It takes place during the Nebuchadnezzar years, where he's first he's going over to the east, and he asked all the nations of the west, come help me out. I'm going over to sack the east, and I need your help. And they're all like, yeah, whatever, piss off. And so he ends up going there, and he actually is successful. And now he comes back with even more of a larger of an army because he just conquered all these other armies. And now the West is he's like, okay, now I'm going to get you guys back. And so he's basically wreaking havoc on the entire world, the known civilized world.
Yeah, for that area. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they have a problem. And do you want to? Why don't I throw it over to you? Why don't you tell me what you think about the story?
Yeah. Well, I'm just intrigued by the fact that there's, again, this is a story named after a female, and the second half is this, or second, like first 7 chapters, I guess, is the setup that you just described.
Yeah.
And then another 9 chapters, I guess, about Judith and how she chooses to take down the general. I do want to say also just a couple of comments about the story itself, because it's kind of funny. Nebuchadnezzar, a lot of people know that name, right, from Daniel in the lion's den. But so Nebuchadnezzar was actually historically was a king of Babylon. But in this story, they're calling the king of Assyria Nebuchadnezzar, and there was never that connection historically. So it is important to note that this is fiction, and even the people at the time would have known that this is fiction, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. I think it's really important to note that, and it helps, I think, on a bigger picture to be able to say there are stories, things that are made up that are in here, but they still represent something for the people, and that's why they collected them, and that's why they are in canon for 2 billion people on the planet. Like, yeah. But it's fiction, and yeah, so that's one of the things I would want to say about Judith. But I think, yeah, she's pretty cool, kind of a badass, right? She's she's widowed, and she chooses to find a way to get into Holofernes' tent, essentially. And she's clever, right? She sets up this gig that I'm going to tell you how to take down my people, because, right, they're about to eat things they're not supposed to eat, and so that means God's going to hand them over to you. Right? Like that works.
It really was well put. Like,
yeah.
And another thing, I don't know if I'm going too crazy with the parallels, but like she goes through the gate, and I noticed that happens in Esther's story. She goes through the gates to go confront the king. I'm wondering if there's like maybe that, but that's as far as I'll probably go with that.
Is that just an architectural thing that's important to note, or is there some symbolism in the passing through the gates? Perhaps there may be, more than I'm aware of. Yeah, I think I think it is interesting, though. It is a space of men's power, is one of the things I would say about the gates.
That makes sense.
That's where men hang out.
Yeah, that probably explains it better, because she's going into something. She's going to face something. And for anyone who has no idea how the story ends, why don't we just tell the story?
Briefly. Sure.
Yeah. Do you want to tell it?
Or I was just going to say a couple more things just to wrap it up.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, what the other thing I liked about her story, or her approach to them, is she sets it up that she goes out every night to pray, so that they don't notice on the 4th night when she leaves. They think nothing of it. And the 4th night she's leaving with Holofernes' head in a blanket, or in the canopy that she takes down off the bed. So she and her maid, find their way into his chamber, and she cuts off his head and rolls his body onto the floor so they won't see him right away, and takes his head with her. And kind of a clever, a lovely story. She saves the people. They all celebrate her, and she remains unmarried to her dying day.
Right. Yeah, they definitely tell you that. And then I noticed that she like dresses up real nice, puts on nice clothes, puts on makeup, and they're like thrown back by her beauty.
She's
never met a woman who's so smart and beautiful.
Right. Yeah, and the Hebrew people must be amazing to have such beautiful women. So we better make sure we do destroy them, because otherwise they're going to come in here and take over or something. Like, really hilarious, like, extension from the fact that she's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But then they put their guard down. She gets
Yeah.
them drunk. You know,
Yep.
they drink the wine, and then
Yeah.
everyone's like, "Oh, she's fine. Leave her alone." And then
Right. Right.
she gets alone with the general.
Right.
It's business time. She gets to her prayers. She goes, "Lord, give me the strength."
She does.
And she does it. And then, yeah, it really is a well put story. It's really an amazing story. Like there should be like a movie about it or something.
Why isn't there? Yeah. Why hasn't that one been done? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, the intro to her story in the Bible that I like to use makes a comment about the fact that, in Jewish culture or historically, Jews had no problem celebrating her. In the same way, they had no problem celebrating Yael, who does something similar, right? She seduces a general into her tent, gets him where she can, protect, she's protecting him. And when she gets him alone, she drives a tent peg through his forehead. So that, there are comments about, is this ethical? Is this moral for these women? Like, do we actually want to uphold these women because their examples are not exactly moral examples? Well, in a time of war, what do you expect, or whatever? But that Christians have a hard time embracing Judith because of this. But Jews are like, dude, she saved the people. Okay, right?
What I find funny about that, it's like Alexander the Great's so amazing because
Right.
he conquered the whole world. What do you
Right.
think? You think he didn't kill anybody?
How do you think he did that exactly?
Julius Caesar's so great. He conquered Gaul. Okay, what do you think he did there?
Thank you.
I think he set up.
The Great is added to these men's names, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing how they're. Oh, Judith cut someone's head off to save her nation. I don't know if I should praise that or not. What are we thinking about? Like what are we thinking about here? He's a hero. She did what she had to do.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you got to, and that's kind of like sort of like a weird like message that sometimes you have to do some things that you got to do.
You do, yeah. I mean, there is that piece of she seduces, right? She knows that she's beautiful and she dresses up with everything, right? And it worked. I mean, everybody in her, village is like, whoa, and when she walks out. Yeah, so there's a like, well, it works, right? Work with what you've got.
Yeah,
I don't know,
it's
smart.
I told you this before we started, but it reminded me of the Herodotus story, which I'm wondering which one was first because I think the Judas story is not that old, right?
No, it's late 2nd century
Yeah.
BCE.
Okay. So
Herodotus is
Herodotus was definitely before, and it's a famous book. Everyone knows Herodotus. He's the father of history.
right.
I'm sure maybe they might have heard of him. I don't know. Maybe not. But in this story, you have King Cyrus, who is the Messiah in the Old Testament. So he's well known. He's one of the like Lord's anointed shepherds, whatever.
Right.
And so he's real famous. He's real powerful. He does like Alexander the Great does, basically conquers the world and
Right.
does this then. But in Herodotus' story, and I've talked to scholars about this, they say this probably isn't true. It's probably just a made up story.
Okay.
But anyways, bear that in mind. It's probably not how Cyrus dies. But according to Herodotus, he goes into a country called the Mazagate. It's in Scythia somewhere, like a small country of Amazons. I think they consider them like people like the Scythians, I guess you would call them, which they're called the Mazagate. And their queen is Tomyris, and he wants to conquer them. And she says, "No, get off my land."
I was gonna say yes to that.
Right. So they go to war, and then he conquers her son, and he tries to keep the son as like a token for bargaining, but he ends up dying in his hands on accident. He didn't kill him. He died somehow. I forgot how it happened, but she finds out that her son died in his hands. She went ballistic and then just went in there and like totally ravaged the whole entire camp, kills him, cuts his head off. Like this is why I think this is why I thought of this story. And then she puts his head into a wine, what do you call it? A wine skin, fills it with his blood and says, "Now you'll never have to thirst for blood again." So then I think about this story when I'm reading Judith. I'm like, what's up?
Of course.
Yeah. Maybe this is like a motif now.
Yeah. I would think that's exactly what this is. One way of expressing fear of the power of women, right? Or something, right? I think that there's some interesting, significant ones that play out over time. And that's, I didn't know that, and I guess I probably should. It's just one of those things that I'd never really looked into before. But certainly Herodotus then is setting the stage or starting this motif. Absolutely. And so it shows up with Judith. It shows up with, I know we weren't going to talk about them today, but it, it shows up with Salome and John the Baptist in the gospel. So, it just, it's interesting. Yeah, it's good. I wonder if that's, now I'm wondering why historians have told you, or you've read some historians' work that said that it's probably not.
Yeah, most people I talk to who are like, pretty well educated in that area say it's probably not true.
But I wonder why.
I wonder why too. I really,
I'm not.
I want it to be true for some reason.
Me too. And I just want it to be a little bit of like misogyny that's telling them that it's not true.
You had this King Cyrus who literally was like the archetypal king of the world, unstoppable, has the whole world under his thumb, and he dies at the hands of a woman. Like, it's kind of a cool story.
It is a cool story.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Maybe go read that one.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's some scholars out there think it is true. Maybe I should get them on and ask them why they think it's true.
I think, ask them to back up why it's not, because.
Yeah. What do you why do you think this is true?
Yeah.
But yeah. So with Judith, what else are we missing with Judith? That's pretty much it, right?
I think so. She is a hero for her people. She is praised. She is upheld as a hero for the rest of her days. She lives to the ripe old age of 105. What else? Yeah, she's.
Yeah.
Really, why don't more people know of her? Is the question.
Right. Exactly. And it really is it's a really good story. It's something different. It's a change up from the normal.
It is. And, even thinking about, for instance, her name, Judith, that, that's a name that means the Jewish people, or perhaps a way to say she stands for the Jewish people in this story. That's when you think about biblically, the Hebrew Bible, the people of Israel are often referred to as a woman, but often in a subordinate role to Yahweh, their husband. And they're getting their bleeps whooped by God because they're step out on God. And how nice to have a female representing the people, and in a strong way, right? I mean, I just think that's kind of lovely.
And what I just thought about too is you have the aspect of Sophia, or in Hebrew, Chachma, I think.
Chochma, yeah.
Chachma.
Yeah.
And this wisdom, this divine wisdom, it's always considered to be female. So you get this character Judith, and she's very wise. She saves the people through her wisdom. So I think maybe she represents that aspect of the divine, and like incarnate, basically. Like she's like a prophetess, if you want to call it that.
Prophetess, or some form of a general of her own, right? I mean, she's taking matters into her own hands. Or compared to the judges in the book of Judges, that delivered the people.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think you have there's definitely something there with that aspect, with the wisdom thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that's how she really does it. She's thinking things through. She's being wise. She's
clever.
Clever. Yeah. So I think that makes a lot of sense why they would write the story that way. And do you know anything about what time period this was written in, by who, or is this kind of a mystery?
Well, it is written, most likely written after the Maccabean revolt. So, or after the Maccabean period, whichever way you want to look at that. So their revolt, that war starts in 164-ish BCE, and it lasts about 20 years. About 142 is when the Maccabees finally get to rule. So it's either after that battle or after the Maccabean period. So late second. So.
It seems like a time period where a lot of different books get written too. Like, yeah.
There were, yes, absolutely. I didn't want to interrupt you there. Yeah.
That was the question. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Job, the book of Job is, I'm sorry, Job is earlier, is during exile, but the book of Daniel comes at that point in time also. Yes. But it's written as if it transpired, much earlier.
Right, right. Just like Judith sort of takes place in a time period hundreds of years before.
Right.
And like you pointed out, there's like he's not an Assyrian. He's a Babylonian.
He's a Babylonian, yeah.
So it's like you get the Darius the Mede thing in Daniel. He's like, he's not a Mede. He's I think he was like Persian. I forgot what he was, but
Darius is Persian. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you could kind of tell. And then someone else pointed out to me that another reason why you can tell, like linguists who are do this every day,
Yeah.
who study this for 20 years. It's like to them, if they read something that said on a piece of paper, it's like, "Yo, what's up, dude? What's going on? What are you doing this weekend? Oh yeah, we're going to the party." Like you would read that, you know it's modern.
Right.
But if someone was like, "Hey, this is from 1945," and you read that, you'd be like, "No, it's not 1945."
Right.
A linguist can point that out in seconds. They can just read
Right.
it away and be like,
Know which time period it's from.
yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
you gotta trust them on that, and they're pretty adamant that these texts are, like you said, 2nd century BC. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that out there for
And
anybody who's wondering why we're just gonna randomly place these things. We're not it's like we're not doing that, like,
we're trusting, yeah, the experts who know what they're doing, and certain events, right? And that these kinds of stories come out of a need, right? We have a need for, um, some form of cohesion, or we need a rallying cry or rallying story after being demolished by the Syrians here for the last few decades, or whatever that, whatever it may be. The story of Daniel comes at a time of great need in, some sort of national pride, essentially. So yeah, that's also part of what's going on. I mean, some, the the biblical scholars reading was suggesting that, Nebuchadnezzar is actually kind of a step in, or in place of Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth, who was the
Right.
Syrian, overlord essentially for them at the time, right before that led to the Maccabean revolt. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
There's always like that person that fills that role, whether it's Pharaoh
right, right.
or in Christianity, it's Herod, There's always that one guy he's like the evil
The evil guy, right? The representation of, yeah,
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 interesting.
it is.
So what I think we should maybe move on to, what do you think, Esther
Yeah,
maybe?
let's talk about Esther.
Esther, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Tell us about Esther.
Well, it's really funny because I wanted to ask you to go.
Yeah, I
But
I have a lot to say about Esther. I have a lot to say.
you do, okay.
How many
Well, and I just want to preface this by saying I'm really conflicted about Esther.
Yeah,
I'm very conflicted. Yes, she has a book named after her. Great. That doesn't mean anything. Let's doesn't necessarily. It's nice, and let's see what that means. Um, I just asked a pastor, whom I know, what they would want people to know about Esther, and this pastor was like, "Well, she got stuff done, like she was important." And
yeah.
and I think that's true. I also think that if we could go a little deeper, I think it's a little more complicated than that. But I'm curious to know what you think about Esther and her story.
So, this is gonna get a little crazy, but I
Is it?
think Esther is a Hebrew retelling of the story of Ishtar.
Ah, okay. I'm not fully familiar with that story, so tell us more, please, because I'd love to.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Esther, in the story of Ishtar, her brother and lover, Tammuz, is he gets killed by a bunch of demons. He goes down into
Right.
the underworld,
Right.
and she goes down to save him, and when she brings him back up, well, let's hold on, let's wait, say that for a second. When she goes down, there's a sequence of events that happens. She has 2 maids with her. Also in the Esther story, Esther has 2 maids with her. They're called Gala in the Ishtar story. But as she's passing through these different portals, she's taking off different pieces of clothing. And in the Esther story, she's taking off her bracelets and her earrings the same way. Like the
Hmm.
sequence kind of lines up, and
Okay.
then she faces the queen of the underworld, and somehow she does. She like I forgot how she wins that, but she wins that somehow through like talking through like some dialogue, and she's able to bring Tammuz back up with her.
Mhm.
But in this story, I don't think it's exact. I'm not saying they're
Mm-mm.
copying it.
Mm-mm.
I think it's sort of influenced from it, but I think they're sort of, filling the role as, like, um, not Marduk, Mordecai. I almost said Marduk.
Yeah.
Mordecai
Uh-huh.
is, he's in trouble. He's like this Haman character is really gunning after him, and he's trying to set him up, and, so Esther goes into the kingdom and passes through all these gates and then gets into the inner chamber with the king, and he likes her, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, what do you need? Well, I'll give you everything you want." And so she puts in the word for Mordecai and saves him, and then Haman's ends up in trouble. And so I don't know. I've heard someone point that out to me. I looked into it, and I was like, this makes sense. I think there's something there.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
I think they're taking, and I'm not saying this is like, oh look they're copying. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this is a sacred story
Mhm,
from
mhm.
the ancient world that
Babylonians, yeah.
passed down to people.
Right.
And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a great thing. I think that's sacred. That makes sense to me.
Right. For some Jews or Christians, that might make it sound like, "Oh, you're dismissing it or undermining it," but really at the time, that was actually just the opposite. It's as you said, it was a sacred story for them, it's a sacred story for these people. It actually strengthens it, I think, in a really interesting way to say that they are playing off of these even older stories. And, I can't help but think of the Greek versions of that, right? With Orpheus into the underworld to
Right.
Persephone and, similar thing, right? Flipped, of course, in this case, right? Because it's a woman going
ISIS
after a
looks like
man.
Isis and Osiris,
Right,
you know?
exactly. The
And so
woman.
yeah, and there's the woman savior,
Yeah.
and she was the Soter. She was the
Soter, yeah.
the Demeter was the Soter, or Isis was the savior, or in
Yeah,
this case, the Babylonian Sumerian story.
yeah,
And Nana is another version of it, but I wanted to save this
yeah.
part for the end. When she brings Tammuz up with her, she brings up the dead, and
Mm,
the Babylonians at the Akitu festival
hmm.
was the first month of the year, but it's equivalent to like the middle of March to the middle of April of our months.
So,
They're
spring,
like just happy, yeah, spring.
things
So
coming
they
back to life.
bring up life with them.
Mhm, yeah.
Bring up the plants.
It's their Easter, it's their
Yes.
spring coming back to life festival. Yep.
So you can see how this would be a sacred story.
Absolutely, exactly.
The Hittites had a version of the story, which got passed on to the Greeks, and then you had the Eleusinian mysteries, like you
Mhm,
mentioned. It's almost exactly not exact I shouldn't say it. I hate
mhm.
using that word exactly the same, but you can see the
You
parallels.
can see parallels, yeah.
You see how,
Mhm.
okay, Adonis sort of fits that role of Tammuz. He's trapped in the underworld. He has to stay there for 6 months. Persephone goes down,
Uh-huh.
but this one's a little bit different because you have Demeter and Persephone. It's like they sort of split the role into 2 different parts.
Mhm.
But it's still it kinda it still captures the agricultural,
Exactly. Yeah.
story,
Yeah.
basically.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I think, yeah.
That's what you think about Esther. That's really
I could be wrong.
interesting.
I could be
Yeah.
wrong. I'm not dogmatic about it, but I
Oh,
think
I think no, I think I mean, even just look at the names, Esther and Ishtar, like, those are the same names.
right,
Just different vowels, and that's how that works, like, so it's not a and of course, Esther isn't a Jewish name, right? So her Hadassah is her name. So Esther is a Babylonian name, so it's not a far stretch at all to make your point, that's not that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense to me. I like to think about Esther through this other lens, and that's, I don't want to get off the topic, but
Oh, yeah.
you
Take
know, she y she replaces Vashti, and Vashti is the queen to Ahasuerus, right? And she refuses to be
right.
trotted out in front of a bunch of men who've been drinking for days. She refuses to be, you know,
No, that's a really
strip
good point.
dance. Yeah, and because of that, she's let go, because good gosh, what if that got out that this woman stood up to her man and said, "No, we can't have that. Get rid of her." That's really what they say in the story. And so the eunuchs go throughout the whole kingdom, far and wide, and bringing in women who are beautiful, to see who will be the next queen. And Esther, Hadassah, Esther is chosen from among the locals, even though they don't know she's not actually native to the area because it doesn't really matter. And so one of the eunuchs actually takes her under his wing because he favors her. And so it's the eunuchs who run the beauty pageant and all the beauty treatments for 6 months leading up to this thing. And then somehow he tells her, so Haggai is the eunuch who tells Esther when it's her turn to go have sex with the king, to see who's going to be the queen. So he gets to deflower. I don't like that word, but he gets to have sex with all these virgins, right? Or women who haven't had sex yet. I don't like the word virgin either. I'm trying to get rid of it. So
Yeah.
anyway, he tells her what to do when she goes in to see him to like win him over. So apparently Haggai's heard, maybe the king talking about what his fantasies are or something, and he tells her to go do it. And in the morning, he's like, oh my gosh, the king was like, wow, that was awesome. My fantasies fulfilled. So I read Esther a little bit more complicatedly than just she does, right? She does step up to the plate. I think that's really important. But she's being told by other people what to do. She's being told by her cousin or uncle, depend however whatever relationship that is. He's outside the castle, and he gets messages to her through the eunuchs, and she does step up. It does take courage. And it does take seduction to get done what needs to be done, which is, it's a rub for me. It's a tension for me that all of these women, whether they are killing someone in the end or not, are having to be seductive to get work done, right? That's a tension for me. I want to be clear about that. I do value what Judith did. I do value the saving things that these women are doing.
Yeah.
But it is hard for me because these ancient stories are, when they are read, we're seeing this thing about women have to seduce men in order to trick them into doing what needs to be done. I don't know. Like, what's the message there on that level? And
a really good point.
This is a perpetual issue from my perspective, right? It's still alive and well.
Yeah, it's almost like they're saying, well, these are women's assets. So this is how a woman's going to be successful.
Right.
Like, that's not really that good of a message.
Thank you. And then you think about all the stuff that came out with Me Too and, with people expecting that women will do that because it's right. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not, it's complicated for me. So
no, you're 100% correct. I mean, like, people roll their eyes when you say that stuff, like, oh, Me Too, whoa, oh, come on. But like, it's like literally everywhere you looked, left or right, it was like there was another CEO or another art producer or movie producer or whatever, like every day for like, even right now it's still happening. Like, so like you have to. This is something that we should be discussing. Like, it's not like yeah, you can roll your eyes all day, but like, this is reality. Like, this is what's happening. Right.
So we need to be clear when we do see it, to point it out instead of smoothing it over, I think.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. It's like, why does the heroine, is that how you say heroine?
Heroine. Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. But why does the heroine always have to be doing the same thing? Oh, she seduces the bad guy and then saves the day. Why can't she be like, I don't know, why can't she do something different? I don't know, like lead an army or something. Who knows?
I mean, right. Yeah, that's what Deborah does, but we don't.
But yeah, why is that? Deborah never gets talked about.
I don't know.
That's one of the judges.
Why do you think she doesn't get talked about? Yeah, I mean, she was a ruler over Israel. Yeah.
Which is really, really strange that like that in that time of the world, people would even want to admit that, because you'd think that people back then would be more, or maybe not. Maybe they're not as maybe that's just like a perception we have of the past.
Which way does it work? Yep. Yeah. I mean, there are women in there who are doing some interesting things. Miriam, Moses' sister, is kind of important, does some interesting things, and she's a musician, and she's and blah blah blah.
I agree. Until then they get in trouble and she's the one who gets punished instead of everyone else.
Yes.
And then you're like, what? I can't. I'm barely remembering the details.
Yeah, she gets leprosy.
Yeah, that's okay. So what exactly happens here?
They're questioning the woman that Moses wants to marry, Zipporah, and there's an interesting piece about that in terms of some people say it's because, well, it doesn't matter, but she is probably darker skinned than them, but she's also higher class than them, and so it's not clear, if you don't know the context, which reason they're resisting this marriage. I don't know for sure, and it's I mean, it's kind of interesting. Were they being reverse elitists, or were they? I don't know. Anyway, so they're complaining about this, and so God, both Aaron and Miriam are complaining about that, and so God sends leprosy to Miriam.
But Aaron's fine.
Aaron's fine, yeah. See, and Moses steps up.
I remember reading that and being like, "What the hell did I just read?"
Exactly. What did that come from? What story? What are they trying to explain here?
It was like one of those. It was like every once in a while they throw a story at you, like the the bear is with an Elijah thing.
Yes, right.
The heck? Or the snakes when they're all begging, "We're starving." Okay, here's some snakes.
Right.
What the heck? So, I don't know,
Or
and
just random manna from the
yeah,
heavens
and
and
so the story with, Miriam, that was one of those moments where I was like, "What does that mean?
mhm,
Why
mhm.
why would she get leprosy?"
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just
Yep.
something to think about, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That takes me into a different tangent about, reverse racism or this form of racism that we're taught that is, like, actually black is beautiful in biblical contexts, historically, geographically speaking, and white is not. White is a curse, actually. Sorry, that's a different conversation another day.
Oh,
Stick to women. Okay.
no, it's definitely some truth to that, though. But, since we're on the topic of Miriam, why don't we go to the Miriam of the New Testament?
Okay. Nice little segue there. Yeah.
So Mary Magdalene,
Mhm.
separated from the Mary, the mother,
Yes.
an interesting character and shrouded in mystery. Unless you have some Gnostic gospels, then you can get some more details.
Right, right, right. So this yeah, right up your alley, huh? To
Yeah.
talk about the Gnostic versions of Mary, I'm sure.
What do you think about Mary?
What do I think about Mary Magdalene?
Yeah, there's the story, who she is, what does she represent, you know?
Biblically, yeah, Newer Testament wise, um, I think of her as a disciple. I think of her as prominent among the disciples. I think of her as kind of the ringleader of among the women disciples. I think of her as probably having been a bit um, outspoken and strong, and she is the only one listed in all 4 empty tomb scenes. There are several women listed in Matthew and Luke, but there isn't an empty tomb. Mary goes to the empty tomb in Mark, and Mary is the first one to go and the only one to go in John, and then she runs back and brings back Peter and the beloved disciple. So I think of her as, this she's gotten short shrift, she's gotten a bad reputation. I think that she is because she is all those things, that is why her reputation was, I think, destroyed or intentionally denigrated by early church fathers. And that's why we don't get a whole lot. What we do get a few snippets. We don't have a whole lot about her in the Newer Testament. But again, back to your other comment, why the fact that there's any is worth being grateful for, I think, or something excited about.
You know what that tells me? It tells me there's something historical behind this. There's
Right.
some truth to this.
There's a nugget there somewhere, right?
It's like, why even add this to the story if we're just gonna try to keep it hidden?
Right.
So,
And
to me, it makes me think there's something there, something
right.
real
There is a nugget somewhere in there.
there. Yeah.
And, just to kind of cut to the chase on Mary Magdalene and why most people I know that when I talk about it, they just assume that she was a prostitute, right? And that comes from a kind of an overlay of 3 different stories to get that misunderstanding. So the first time Mary Magdalene is referenced, the earliest point in any of the chronicles, of the Gospels, is in chapter 8 of the Gospel of Luke. And immediately prior to that is a story of one of the versions of the story of Jesus's feet being anointed by a woman.
Right.
And in chapter 7 of Luke, it's very clear that this woman is a sex worker, and it's a very sensual moment, by the way. I don't ever hear anyone read it that way in church. Funny. Huh. It's a sensual moment, and she's got oil to pour all over his feet, and she's kissing his feet and weeping, crying, washing it with her tears, wiping it with her hair.
Right.
But nobody names her, and so this woman isn't named, and so there's no way for the very next verse to start talking about Mary Magdalene
I agree.
and not have said, and by the way, that was her, or anything like that, right? She wasn't named as the woman anointing his feet.
So you don't think it's her?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I don't at all.
Does anyone ever try to say who it do people actually think it's Mary Magdalene or no?
No, so here's the thing, it's in John's gospel. The Mary of Mary and Martha anoints Jesus's feet and
Oh,
it's anoints Jesus, and it's at a different point in the storyline
okay.
in John. It happens at the very beginning of his mission or whatever. It happens at a different point. It doesn't matter. It's a different point.
Right.
But Mary does there. And so she is named as the woman anointing him. Then there's this unnamed woman in Luke 7. And just to be clear, the reason I don't think that is Mary is because why wouldn't they say Mary Magdalene does this when they clearly know since they clearly know Mary Magdalene, a woman in the city who was a sinner, having learned that he was eating in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster jar of ointment. And so it doesn't make sense for them not to name her.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that actually does make sense.
Since they do know Mary. Absolutely,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I would just say Mary. You're right.
Right. And it's right after that story, though, that we get starting at the beginning of Luke chapter 8. Soon afterwards, he went on through cities, blah, 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 proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him as well as some women. So
So there's more than just Mary there.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you just definitely cleared that. Definitely makes more sense now.
Yeah, as well as some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward Chuza, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their resources. So these women actually made their travels possible. So that's why I say she was an important woman. She's listed first here. She's listed first anytime she's referenced. She's got money.
She's sort of leading these other women through this movement. That makes sense, actually.
And it's also, this story is where we get the belief or the conviction to say that women were disciples of Jesus also. He didn't just have male disciples, that Luke tells us.
Well, that's because, and that's why I thought that whoever anointed his feet, I thought of Mary Magdalene being involved,
right?
Because she's right there,
right.
So and I'm thinking but even if she wasn't exactly her doing it, it might have been someone she's with. She's around these people,
right? I mean, I see that
she might be a leader in this sort of group.
Sure. Yeah. But I do, especially because those kinds of details in the stories themselves do matter. Yeah. And then they get smushed and confused over time, and then they get cementized, like cemented for people, that someone in the early to mid 2nd century was, had a homily, a sermon about Mary Magdalene as a prostitute, and so made that really clear. I think it's because of, I'm actually mulling over your point right now, Neil, just to be clear. I think it's an interesting point to say that perhaps this woman did come to see Jesus because she'd heard about him through Mary, or Mary was hanging out with a bunch of sex workers, right? And so maybe she was head among them, and that's why she had a lot of money. But the story doesn't say that. Right. And I'm interested in calling out the fact that people did make that claim early, and hung on to it, even though the story doesn't give us. I do actually see your point, and so I'm going to probably hedge some on when I talk about this in the future. But it was a move to denigrate her and her reputation, and that worked.
Yeah.
And that's the part. And actually, to that point, regardless of what was actually historically true, I do want to just point out 2 books real quick, if I can. I could have sent you the link so you could have them up, but I'll
put them in the description so people can buy them. So you guys, this is The Resurrection of Mary Magdalene. It's in the description, the link. You'll see it right there.
Yep. And then this is the Cliff Notes version of that book, which is called Mary Magdalene Understood.
Let me just give it a little solo real quick. There we go.
Okay. Right. And it's the first book, The Resurrection of Mary Magdalene, was written by Jane Schaberg, and she was a Catholic. She wasn't a nun. Well, I guess she was a nun. She was one of the orders, and she taught in Chicago, outside Chicago, and then she and another New Testament scholar kind of wrote this boiled down version, like just the highlights. Essentially, it's really, really a lovely piece, and on Mary Magdalene and her importance in the early church, and this whole issue of women in the early church, and the way women's involvement and importance was overwritten or silenced, somehow, kind of brushed aside. And it's hard not to say that it was done intentionally.
Yeah, because when you look at, some of these epistles like Timothy and how they're saying how women should be compared to how they were treated in Jesus' own ministry,
Mhm.
they're the ones coming out and doing the anointing.
Mhm.
Think about how important that is. The anointing in the context of the Old Testament, who anoints the king? The high
Right.
priest, the holiest Levite, the highest. You can't just and then in Jesus, he says, "Hey, this woman over here, you could do it. I don't care what.
Well,
I don't care who you are."
but it is also the anointing they're talking about is okay, so you're talking about the anointing,
I'm not
done by the
saying
women
that.
prior to his death?
I'm
Right.
I'm comparing because the word Messiah means anointed, so
Right.
there
Right.
has to be an anointment happening in the story. Don't notice how all 4 gospels have some sort of form of anointing, because
Mhm.
you can't be anointed without being anointed. So I
Mhm.
think I'm speculating here, but I think the message is this anointing does not come from a king or a high
Right.
priest.
Right.
This comes from the average person. This is for everyone. This is for the whole world. It's not just for a select elite. This is for anybody.
Yeah, if it
And
comes from a
that's
woman.
a powerful message, right? It could come
Mhm.
from a woman
Mhm.
that he just met 5 minutes ago. He doesn't even know who she is, and she can anoint
Mhm.
his feet, and
Mhm.
that's how he becomes the Messiah.
Mhm.
It's really,
Yeah,
if you think about it, it's really powerful.
it's it's quite powerful, and I mean, and the fact that the gospel writers themselves were okay with that, and that I mean, come on, whoever their names are, yeah, these at least 2 of them are sex workers, 4 different versions, they're not all the same. I mean, at least one is a sex worker. I'm trying to remember all the 4 different versions. I can't pull them all up right
Right,
now on top of my head, but yeah. So,
but
yeah, no, that's I mean, it's one of those things where people say, "Oh, yeah, he ate with prostitutes and sex and tax collectors." I'm like, "No, it just hold on a second. Will you please stop and think about that for a moment? Like,
yeah,
think about that. Like, it's not even just that this makes it he was here for everybody, but think about what that says, that he accepted that
yeah,
from her. It's kinda like me wanting to say, "No, no, 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 I want you to stop and think about the fact that these women provided for the disciples in their travels." Can we just take a moment on that one? Like,
yeah.
we wouldn't have the story if it weren't for women providing food and lodging.
Yeah.
Come on,
It
people.
it makes you wonder how that got. I mean, I know we were talking about 200 years in between the church and the formation of Christianity. So that might explain it, but it makes you wonder how you get from that to, okay, women can't be preachers, they can't do this, they can't do that. It has to be all the bishops, the priests, the popes, all men. Like, what is that? Where did that come from? And I think it might come from the church, like the Roman imperial cult was sort of set up that way. So you had sort of a patriarchal setup. I think, and I'm not saying that the Roman imperial cult started Christianity at all. What I'm saying is when they converted, when like the years between Constantine and Theodosius, that's a long time. But like in between those years, they're converting offices over to Christians. Like they're moving churches. And I think they're just keeping their patriarchal structure that was already there, but they're just adopting Christianity as like the theology. So that I think they failed in that department of really grasping what Christianity was meant for. It's like letting women be a part of the ministry, right?
Yeah, and I would suggest it actually happens even earlier than that. Um, I'm working on the chapter on Ephesians 5, the passage about, relating to marriage, and this whole conversation is an important one to me in terms of what we have in the genuine Pauline letters in terms of the way things were supposed to go and run within the church according to the early guy.
Yeah,
Equality, right? We've got some almost radical equality for a Jewish man to be talking about
yeah,
and establishing. But then that is part of the problem. And that kind of equality, not just between men and women and freed and enslaved, Jew and Gentile, not just that that's happening, but that they're meeting in house spaces. And so I actually think it has as much to do. I will be mulling over your point about the imperial cult in terms of the structure and its influence there, but I tend to think of it a little bit differently in terms of when they were meeting in house spaces, it could be misperceived from the outside, because if women are having a role of power and a voice in a house, there are clear household codes here, people. We need to have properly run households. That means you have men in charge. And so if you have a woman speaking, what? This is inappropriate, even though it's just for the time of church. So but we make that, we make that kind of a claim that it's because of household codes, because the writers themselves then, for Colossians, Ephesians, and then it shows up in First Peter, use the household code roles and framework to talk to the people about their roles within the church. So the early Paul doesn't have any talks about women as leaders of churches. And then we have someone coming along and saying, no, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. So I think it's actually, ironically, that radical equality or egalitarian nature of the early church is actually what caused them to backlash into very patriarchal standards. And we see that by the end of the first century. We see it that early in the writings, and then in the way people are focusing on the later writings as a very convenient way to make decisions.
I think you make a good point. These social norms are already so strong.
Yeah.
It's hard to penetrate them.
Right.
I was pulling something. I don't know if you saw me pulling something up while you talked.
I did.
I was looking up Marcellina, and I wanted to get a quote from Pagels on this.
Okay.
She wrote about this women teacher named Marcellina in the 2nd century. And she says, I'll just read this real quick. Women played prominent roles in many early Christian sects as prophets, teachers, healers, missionaries, presbyters. Mary Magdalene and Mary Bethany were female followers of Jesus who are mentioned in the Gospels, who were believed to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God. Women like Mary and Martha were explicit role models for Marcellina and her fellow preachers. And she goes on a little bit about this, but I think she's except, this is one person, but at least we have some examples of real leaders like Marcellina in Alexandria, in this sort of I guess you could call them Gnostic, but it's just a variety of Christianity. It's just Christianity.
It is a version of Christianity, so you can just call it Christianity if you want.
Yeah, exactly. And her carpocration sect, I was just talking to Litwell about this. We did a whole video about this. Everything that they taught was somewhere from the Bible. So they're very communist. Everybody share things. What yours is
X2.
mine. That's from X. Yeah. Almost everything that they taught that's considered heretical is somewhere in the New Testament.
Of course.
They were Bible-believing Christians. They weren't just we're just going to have orgies and do what we want. and that's the message. That's people perceive it that way. Oh, they're Gnostics. They must have been having orgies and putting semen in the wine.
Do you hear that a lot? Do you get that?
That's right. That's what Hippolytus says that.
Okay.
Irenaeus says that. And they say crazy things about the people that we find nowhere in any evidence.
Right.
They're just Bible-believing Christians that just didn't win out. They just didn't win the authority role.
Right.
And so that's why I like to point out, look up Marcellina, anyone who's watching, read her stuff. There's some stuff out. It's very fragmentary, but M. David Litwell has a book about it, so it's a pretty good source for it. But yeah.
Nice.
But the reason why I brought that up is because I think there's some resemblance of females having, large roles,
Well, yeah. And it might seem small but are you I'm assuming you actually are familiar with this, but I don't want to, the letter from Pliny to Trajan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And in the middle of that letter, so for your listeners who don't know, it's a letter that's it's written by a guy sent from Rome to go take care of this region of northern modern day Turkey, so Asia Minor at the time, to the regions up there, Bithynia and Pontus. And he's been sent to take care of these Christians. These people are being arrested and tried. And so he's been sent to kind of watch over everything. And he's confused. He doesn't know how to handle it when these people are arrested. Which crime am I supposed to be charging them for? And is it okay? Do I not have to punish them if they repent and say, no, we don't do that anymore, or I don't believe that anymore? Is that okay? Or do I still have to punish them? That's what he's asking the emperor in this letter. And at one point he refers to that some of the people that he questioned, like kind of, I'm thinking, some form of like torturous questioning. And he refers to 2 female slaves who were heads of churches.
Right.
So that's and this letter dates to like around 112, 113 Common Era.
Early.
So
yeah,
right.
This, like right in the beginning. This is one of the first Christian mentions in any sources we have.
Exactly.
It's one. I mean, you got
any pagans, non-Christian.
Josephus, maybe, and then after that, Suetonius, Tacitus. He's like the second one.
Right.
So
and the one in Josephus is questionable.
Yeah, that was all altered and changed.
Added later. Yeah, I mean, it's a little sketchy.
So here you got almost your original source from someone outside the church, outside of Paul, outside the Gospels, mentioning Christians, and he's talking about female leaders being in the church.
Exactly.
Which lines up with the Gospels. Like you have leaders who are women. So I don't know. The point we're both getting at is something happened where this thing got forgotten about, the real way of how it was being done.
Yeah, got forgotten or very intentionally shifted. I think it was politically motivated, and I think it's.
No, you're right.
Yeah, it's. I mean, to be clear, I think that some people, male and female alike, would have, and I'm speaking in binaries, not because that's how I think of people today, but that's how I see people talked about in ancient texts. I just want to be clear about that. I am all about the non-binary existence. But my point is, I think people then as now, whether you're male or female, might have seen women in power and have been felt threatened by that, right? Because not just because it's stepping out of the regular order of things, but because you look subversive when you're doing that. And if you're participating in something in a household space that is supposed to be orderly and well run, so that the city is orderly and well run, so that the empire is orderly and well run, right? Like if you are upsetting the patriarchal order within a household space and people are doing it all over town or all over the region, that can be perceived as politically subversive. And whatever your other identities are, you might want to take down that sect. You might want to do away with it because it could lead to the destabilization of your city or your region. And that, I don't say that as I'm in favor of that way of thinking. I think that's a big piece of what happened and why, in addition to just general misogyny. But
yeah. That's really what it comes down to. It's just, I don't know if this maybe it's a war, like when you're living in times that there's so many wars going on and there's a military culture happening, you have legions everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden there's all this male culture that just takes over.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might have something to do with it.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you. Yeah. Yep.
So I guess with Mary Magdalene, to finish off, she sort of, if you look at the Gnostic gospel, the Gospel of Mary, I'm not sure if it's Nag Hammadi or somewhere else, but they found it. Anyways,
Nag Hammadi. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's the chosen she's the one that he comes to and tells the secret mystery.
Yes,
and no one else gets to know but her.
Right.
And then Peter was like, "I don't believe you. Prove it." So luckily, that's the first thing he says after everything they went through.
Yeah,
after everything he witnessed, after being the one who denied him 3 times, and he's denying him again. But like in this story, which is hilarious.
That's a good point.
The disciples come to her back and were like, "Who are you to say what Jesus told? And why wouldn't you believe her? Why would she just make this up?"
Right.
And I was like, okay, all right. They finished the story off pretty well.
Thanks, Thomas, for stepping up.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting how there's people, whether, I don't know when that was written or not, maybe 2nd century, but there you go. There's another example of Christians who are putting up the women on a high role. She's the chosen. She's the highest of all them.
She's got the best info. Yeah.
She knows the highest
knowledge. Yeah. She's got the stuff that'll set you free.
Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out. And
yeah. She's
anything else about Mary you think we forgot about?
I just, there's my probably to my dying day, I will just be sad that Mary Magdalene, that name, at least in parts of the country where I've lived, is just synonymous with prostitute. That for me is twofold as well, because I wish prostitution weren't thought of the way it is. So that's that. So immediately when you associate a person with sex work, for some reason in this culture and world, that means something negative about you, that you do sex work. Funny, because they have clients.
Right. Yeah.
So
What is
that
like, what do you, does that make it, you're not as bad because you're the one paying for it? Like,
exactly,
what, like,
exactly.
it's
It's
crazy.
the same as the Miriam and Aaron story, right? Why is it the woman gets punished when they're both doing anyway?
Right. Good point.
So I think that's kind of my ultimate takeaway is I wish people could get beyond the negative association with sex work and the negative association of Mary with prostitution, even especially since I don't think it was a part of her story, but I'm willing to reconsider now after our conversation. So that Magdalene, the Magdalene sisters, this name is associated with women trying to get out of sex work or whatever, so I much prefer the more empowered look at who she was, and that she probably did have Jesus's ear and,
Absolutely.
or close confidence and,
Yeah.
whatever that
And
means. And
the fact that he's not even worried about that or thinking about that or concerned about that,
at least in the stories being
he's
told.
concerned about her as a person.
Yeah.
That should tell you a lot about what he was trying to
What
say.
he was up to. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
So, yeah, something to think about.
It is. I like it.
Well, I got the links in the description for the books, and
Okay.
like always, this is amazing. And
It's fun.
and any books coming out soon or anything, or any?
Not as soon as I like, but I am making good progress on my marriage in the Bible. I do not think it means what you think it means. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and I just recently decided to start doing this kind of a consulting thing. It's random, but I attended a funeral, and I was attending the funeral through the eyes of one of the children of the person who had died. And the person who had died was not okay with homosexuality, and the person who died had a lesbian daughter. And so I was processing this whole event through their eyes, and I'm actually going to start a consulting, if you called There For You Consulting. It's kind of a long story, but it'll be up on my website soon, that if you want someone there in your corner who's an outsider who can come in and be unapologetic about who you are, if you're doing a family gathering, or if there's an event you have to attend and you don't want to see Aunt Flo or whatever, you don't want to have that conversation, I can be the physical barrier or kindness or whatever you need, someone to be unabashedly positive about who you are in the face of what it's often at funerals, and at family gatherings, but at funerals, there's a lot of antagonism towards and really just running roughshod over the harm, the hurt, and the woundedness that's happened to people of the LGBTQ community because of other people's faith. So that's the thing I'm looking into now. So I'm excited to get started with that.
That is amazing. Can I put a link for that anywhere?
It will be on my website. It isn't up. I'm not up and running yet. I'm still working out some of the details, but yeah.
All right. Now
Look for that.
It's up there. So guys, look out for that. That's awesome. That is incredible.
Thanks.
So I really hope that plays out well.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah. But thank you so much for another fun conversation. Thanks for having me back on. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And like I always say, you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.